Hello, class. My name is Alexander Gutierrez, and I'm going to be doing a presentation about the announcement by Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, about the allegations against the Indian state that they assassinated a Canadian citizen back in June of this year. To go back to get a little historical background, this really starts back in the 80s in the region of Punjab in India, which is a northern state bordering Pakistan, where the majority ethnic population is Sikhs. If you know anything about India, you know India is a hodgepodge of several different ethnic minorities in the same country. The Sikhs dominated this region of Punjab, and in the 80s, there was a bit of nationalist tendencies, and they started rattling for independence from India. The Indian state responded with intense crackdowns. Initially, they tried to come to some sort of agreement, but in the end, that broke down, and the Indians went full force and cracked down on the movement. Ended up in a lot of casualties, a lot of bloodshed, and this created a problem. Because a lot of Indira Gandhi, which was the prime minister at the time, some of her security detail were Sikhs. And seeing all this violence, they chose to act against her, and they shot her and killed her in 1984, which prompted a lot of retaliatory ethnic violence throughout India, which pushed a lot of Sikhs out of the country, and primarily to Canada, which now has the second largest population of Sikhs outside of India itself proper. Which brings us sort of to today. There's always been a sort of like a simmering Sikh nationalist movement in the background. It hasn't been a really big thing for a really long time. And the individual who was assassinated, Nijjar, was a Sikh nationalist, and he did advocate for Sikh nationalist causes, but generally in a peaceful, open manner. He didn't, as far as we know, yet, didn't sponsor any attacks, so the Indian government claims he did. Hasn't bought weapons and nothing to that effect, as far as we can tell. Now, the Indians, on the other hand, labeled him an anti-India terrorist. They went as far in 2020 to label him that, and they want him to come to India and face a trial. Now, in the end, they did put in a formal request with with Canada. But the Canadians refused that request because there was just simply no evidence. And this greatly infuriated the Indians, but none could have suspected that they'd go to this extent, to assassinate a Canadian citizen in Canada, which, on the face of it, is somewhat insane in the modern era, because India may be a backsliding democracy, but it's still a democracy. For one democracy to assassinate the citizens of another democracy in that democracy, highly problematic for the international system that we have today. Now, this couldn't have come at a worse time for the Canadians and for international norms with the war in Ukraine, tensions in East Asia, because now we're in a bit of a pickle. Because obviously this kind of gives vibes of Jamal Khashoggi and his assassination back in 2018, but doesn't necessarily rise to that extent, because right now Europe, the United States, are actively courting the Indian government to counterbalance China, which means that they don't really want to have to go hard down on the Indians, do any real public statements. And it's pretty obvious they have some evidence. They're not sharing it. We don't know what it is. We don't know what proof they have. But the Five Eyes, which is the intelligence alliance set up between a bunch of the major democracies in the world, basically come to the conclusion it was probably the Indians. Which is, again, problematic, because neither the United States, which is a big important player in this, or Europe really feels any sort of inclination to want to put pressure on the Indian government right now, because they really need that essential geostrategic partnership to accomplish their own independent goals in Asia, which unfortunately largely means this will probably go unpunished, but we don't know, because the situation is actively escalating. Recently announced that the Indian government is denying any Canadian visas to India, and diplomats have been expelled. In all likelihood, we might even see the ambassador be recalled. It is the lowest point in Indian-Canadian relations in their history, and we just have to see where it goes from here. That's my report. Thank you.